Hi, guys. Welcome back to the marathon launch of the Rope of Hope podcast. I am so glad that you guys are sticking with me and coming and supporting this. I think it's really important. My name is Kimberly. I am your host, just in case you don't already know me. And now I have Angela with me, who is the author of Life is a Circus, Enjoy the Show. Angela, thank you so much for coming on my show.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be on the Rope of Hope. Thank you.
Not a problem. So why don't you tell everybody just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So again, my name is Angela Witczak. I am a best-selling author. I am a speaker. I am a life coach. My purpose in life is really to just love God and love people wholly and completely without fear or reservation, which means I just love everybody. And I don't care about your past, your history, anything like that, because you are a person and I love you. And my passion in life, which is much different than purpose, is to inspire and empower women. And so I want all women, sorry, guys. I mean, I do like guys too, but like women are my passion. And I want women to know that they can have their best life ever, whatever that looks like for them, spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally. I want everyone to be inspired and empowered to live their best life. So that's my gig.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Thank you.
Now, you and I had the opportunity to speak, obviously, prior to this episode, and you shared your story with me, and it's pretty complex. I mean, there's a lot in there, but just kind of to skim over real quick, you were a mother at a very young age.
Yes.
You've adopted children. You've given a child up for adoption. You have lost your brother. I'm going to let you kind of delve in and kind of unpack that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. It is unpacking of a lot of suitcases. So here we go. So when, yes, absolutely. When I was 17 years old, I got pregnant in high school. I was that typical teenager that just longed for love. My family was military, so we moved around a lot. So I never really was able to put down my roots. And then we moved around and I just wanted someone to love me. And so for me, love looked like sex. And so I had a boyfriend, we got pregnant, and I decided I was going to keep that baby. I had him just after my 18th birthday. I was a senior in high school. And I didn't know. I played house for a while, but I didn't know. I didn't know how to be a mom. I mean, who does at 18? And I really continued to live a destructive lifestyle. Thank God for my parents, because they raised my son Taylor for while I was in and out, trying to go to college, trying to work, trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. And then one night, my friend said, "Oh man, you've had a hard day. You should come with me and go out to the bar with me." Well, I was only 20 years old, so obviously I wasn't old enough to be in a bar. And I said, I can't get in a bar. And she said, "Don't you worry, I'll get you in a bar." And she was feeding me drinks, and there was men there. And I was pretty naive to believe that anyone was going to take me home, because I was, 20 and I had no self-worth and no self-value. And I went home with someone. I don't know how I got there. I don't know how much of what happened that night. But when I woke up, there was my car out front. And 3 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. And about a month later, I found out I was pregnant with twins. So that's pretty heavy for a 20-year-old. And I had to go back and tell my parents, well, now I'm pregnant with twins. And I moved back in with my parents full time. And I spent the rest of my pregnancy there with them. I found the Lord. I gave my life to the Lord when I was 8 months pregnant, because I really didn't know any other way. And I didn't know what would save me. So I was able to kind of live this life of grace. And then I had my sons. So I have my 3 older children are Taylor, Jonathan, and Isaac. Now this was 20 some years ago, right? Because my twins are 20 now. And then, my twins were 3 weeks old, 4 weeks old. And I met a man who was looking for a church. Well, I had been going to church, and I had found the Lord. And so I was going to church, and I invited him to come along. And we started going to church together. And a couple weeks later, he asked me out, and all the like church biddies were like, "Oh my gosh, you should marry that guy." Like, we were the only two single people in my whole church, and he was 23 and I was 21, and I had 3 kids. And the murmurings, the conversations were, well, who's going to really marry you anyways, Angela? Like, you've got these 3 kids, you're this broken human being. So I had no value and no worth that I could ever like find anybody outside of that. So we got married. And it was very much Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And we were married a month and a half when I found out I was pregnant again. And 3 months into our marriage, he was very abusive. It was the light switch flip. And he left our house one night after he destroyed our entire house and pulled a knife and basically said, like, I'm going to kill you. And I said, if you don't leave, I'm calling 911. And he left, and I got counseling, and I went to my pastor, and I was like, I'm pregnant, and he's left, and why is this my life? Like, what have I done to deserve all of this awful, because now I have 3 children under 3 years old, 3 and under. I'm pregnant. My husband's gone. I don't know what to do. And he gave me wise counsel and said, like, I'm really sorry about all of this. I want you to stay with your husband, but he can't hurt you. Like, he can't be abusive towards you. Like, that's not okay. And I remember on Thanksgiving, my parents told me that, like, we had to go to Thanksgiving together as a family, and that included my husband. And if he did not go, none of us were going. None of us were going to go do Thanksgiving. And so he came along, and that night I said, we need to talk about this. Like, we really need to talk about this. And I said, but you can't hurt me, and you can't do abusive things, and you can't break things. If you're going to break things, you can't live here. And I'll never forget, he walked over to my son's high chair. So my little twin babies, he walked over to the high chair, and he cracked the high chair top over his knee, and he threw it on the ground. And he said, there, I don't have to stay. And so that was the end of my first husband. I call my previous husbands my husbands because they just were men that once were in my life. They just were once was. So my husbands. So he left, and I was alone with nothing, no job, no education, no real plan. And now I'm pregnant. And I was about, it was January, February, so I was probably 6 months pregnant. And my dad had allowed me, he said, I'll pay for you to go to night school if you want. And so I went to night school. My dad babysat. And one night I came home, and he said, Angela, I need to talk to you. And I said, like, okay, like, what do you need to talk to me about? And he said, I really, really think that you should give this baby that you're carrying up for adoption. Your mom and I love the kid. We love the twins. We love Taylor. We just don't know how you're going to do it. And I was angry, and I get out of my house. What are you talking about? You're insane. This is my husband and my baby. And I laid up all night long praying that, whatever the Lord's will was, it would be. And that morning I drove to my pastor and his wife's house, and I said, like, I need to talk to you. And I had just been praying, like, please give me an answer. Like, I need an answer, and it needs to be like billboard clear, like just like a big old sign just for me. And I sat on her couch, and I said, like, here's the situation. Like, my husband's not coming back, and now I'm this destitute, broken, single mom. And and she said, I got to tell you something, but I can't tell you. And I said, why can't you tell me? I don't want to sway your decision, Angie. And so I said, well, just tell me. And she just looks at me, and she's like, someone just came to us, another couple, and just said, what if your baby is supposed to be from Mike and Sonia, another couple in our church that was trying to adopt? And and I was like, okay. That's the answer. And, my pastor came home and he was like, don't be hasty, Angela. Like, this is a huge decision. And I said, I prayed. I know this is the right answer. I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. You've just given me the answer. It's exactly what I asked for. And so we called them and they came over. We had a meeting and and it was all decided in, minutes, hours, really. And I called my husband who had moved from Wisconsin to Georgia and I said, listen, like, you're never going to see this baby. You don't even live in the same state as me. We're getting a divorce. You didn't want me anyways. I think we should do this. And he agreed. And so we gave Michael was born May 30th. So he's about to be 19. And I had him by myself. I spent 4 days in the hospital with him because I had a cesarean. And then we went to court 11 days after that. It was one of the shortest adoptions in Wisconsin because they require a waiting period. And I asked for my waiting period to be waived. And while that 11 days waiting period, I just stayed with my pastor and his wife. I couldn't face my children. I couldn't face my family. I was so broken, in that. And after the adoption was over, I tell this my little first rope of hope. I was in the car picking up my children. The adoption gets finalized. I hug them and kiss them and say, go get your baby. And I run out of the courtroom. And I'm driving down the road with my kids in the car and I'm sobbing. My 3-year-old's like, Mommy, why are you so sad? Mommy, what's happening? And I just said, I'm just sad. Mommy's so sad right now. Mommy's, real heartbroken. And it started raining. I was like, oh, like, okay, God, really? Like, really? Really? I said, can you just make it stop? Please, can you just make it stop? Please, all of it. And the rain cleared and I look over and there's a double rainbow in the sky. And I just pulled over and I just, praise the Lord. Thank you for this promise that you've given to me. You gave me a promise that my little baby's going to be okay and that I'm going to be okay. So that was like my first little sign of hope. But I was so devastated. By the time I was 22 years old, married, divorced, 3 kids, under 4 years old, I've given a child up for adoption. I had zero value. I had zero worth. So I went on to date really destructive people. I ended up meeting a man who was 14 years older than me and on the internet. And we had an on again, off again relationship where we hadn't seen each other, but we were meeting. He was grossly overweight. I was overweight. We were really just, broken people. And eventually we decided we were going to get married. So I drove to our state capitol. I jumped on a bus. I jumped on from the bus to a plane. And I got in the car with him and we drove our way to Las Vegas. Eloped. I didn't tell anybody and we got married. And I didn't know him. And I knew the whole way there, shouldn't do this. Don't do this. But I didn't know any better. I didn't have anybody saying you're valuable, you're amazing, you're a great human. You don't have to live in destruction any longer. You don't have to live this way. And so we, drove our way to Vegas, got married, spent a week with him in Phoenix where he lived. And then we, I flew home. And he packed up his stuff and he was back at our house about a month later. And then I'm introducing him around to people as my husband. We were together 8 years, 8 very, very miserable years. He was not a nice human. And I was not a nice human at that point. But he was not nice to me. And we would get into arguments that several times we would have a knock on the door and the police would show up and say, we could hear you. We were across the way and we could hear you. And he never went to jail and I never went to jail. And, it was just oh, well, he should settle down, and I was in a place where I believed that it was okay for men to treat women this way. It was okay for a man to call his wife the C word, or it was okay for a man to get a little rough. And so I just kind of said, well, this is my job. I'm the stay-at-home wife. I have no money. This is my job to allow him to act this way towards me. And I didn't know any better. And I was going to a church, and they were very clear about the wife should submit. And so that's what I heard. The wife submits. That means doormat. That's not what it means. But that's what I believed. And he couldn't have kids. And I wanted kids so bad. I had given Michael up, when I was just 22. And I was so wanting children. So bad. And so I begged him, please, let's have kids. Please, let's have kids. Please, let's have kids. I didn't know he couldn't have kids. He told me there was a chance he couldn't. I heard there's a chance we can. And he was telling me there's a chance we can't. That chance was like a 99% chance that we couldn't. But I couldn't hear that, because I was a broken human being, and I could not hear this 1%. Like, that's all. Oh, so what you're saying is there's hope. There's hope we can have kids. And so we were about 4 years into our marriage, and I had just given up. Like, I'm done. I get it. This will just be me and him and my 3 boys, and that'll be the way that we are. And then one day, he said there was like a commercial on TV for adoptive children. And he said, I think we should try. We should have tried to adopt kids. And I had a lot of shame and a lot of guilt about giving a child up for adoption and then wanting to adopt. But I did it anyways. And so I made phone calls, and I was delusional. I just believed that I'm going to call and I'm going to find a couple of kids online, and I'm going to drive to Ohio and pick them up the next day. I had no idea. And so
delivery,
right? Exactly. I'll just go get them, just bring them over to my house. We can have dinner, And so, I got in touch with this really great social worker who was like, oh, honey, oh, bless your heart. She was like, you need to become a foster mom. And so do that. And so we went through the licensing and we became foster parents, and it took a year. Normally it takes a couple of months. And so it was all God's timing, because we had been going through this process, and social workers were quitting. And so then we'd have to start over, and it was all this crazy stuff. And finally we got licensed, and I'll never forget, we got licensed on November 1st. And so the day before, obviously, Halloween. And I had asked the lady, okay, so tell me, how do kids, how do people get kids? I don't understand this process. You told me all the things, but I don't understand, what's the final draw to get children into care. And so she kind of went through and she said oh, sometimes we know a child's coming into care, such as a mom who's having a baby that she doesn't want to keep her baby. Or sometimes we have an emergency situation where, a mandated reporter has called it in and called it in and called it in. And finally we've said, okay, we've called it in too many times. It's time to take these children. She said, that's what happened yesterday. We had 3 kids come into care. 1 was planned, 2 wasn't. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And that whole week, I was like, whatever, I'm open. I wanted a baby under 3 years old. I wanted a little girl. I put that on every form, little girl, 3 years old and under, little tiny girl. I had this oh, I'm going to have my little girl that I've always wanted. No, that's not what happened. The lady called me and she said, okay, so we have these 2 children. Remember, I told you about these 2 children that came into care. That was an emergency situation. So they're here, they're in emergency placement, and we're looking for a permanent foster home for them. And I was like, okay. I was like, great. So I'm thinking okay, I'm going to have 2 babies now. How exciting. She said, so they're 5 and 8. And I was like, 5 and 8. Yeah. Nope, that's not what I asked for. It's I just fill out a form like a Subway. This is what I would like. No. So she says, no, trust me. So it's a 5-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl, and I was just salty about all that, because I wanted a baby, I wanted a little girl that I could play dress up with. And she said, but don't worry. They've been so abused that they're a 1 and a 2-year-old. So it's exactly what you were asking for. And I was like, no, don't think so. And so she said, I really want you to meet them. And I was like, okay, so they wanted me to basically do an interview with these kids. and my husband's like, if you meet him, you're going to love him, so like, whatever, if you meet him, you're going to love him. And then we're going to have to take him, and this isn't what you want. And I met them, and I write about this in my book. I walked up, my 8-year-old daughter, who obviously is not my daughter. They both have the most beautiful red hair. They were so neglected and abused. The system called them feral. She dragged her leg behind her. My son, who was 5, had rotted front teeth. They were not cute. My daughter has the most beautiful red hair you've ever seen in your life. And it literally looked like somebody took her ponytail and like took a razor machete and chopped it off. So it was all like lopsided and it was terrible. And it was really terrible. And I say this, and I put this in my book. I went home that day and I was like, I don't think I can do it. They're not cute. They're not anything like, this is not what I wanted, and I just, and like judgment on me, right? But when you have this expectation, you have this box where you think it's going to look like this in this box, and then it doesn't. And then we're disappointed. Well, so that weekend I said, fine, like I will take them for the weekend. And they wanted me to be sure. They knew this was going to be permanent. This was going to be a possible adoption. And so they wanted to know, are you sure? We want you to take them for the weekend. So I had sat down with the social worker. She said, they're like infants. They'll probably never walk. They're probably never going to speak. They're never going to like lead normal lives. Nothing like this. Like you're going to have group home style children for the rest of your life. And I was like, okay, like I'll take them for the weekend. And that weekend was the weekend after Thanksgiving, and my town does like a big, like Hallmark Christmassy every weekend. There's horse and buggies, and there's Santa, and there's hot cocoa on every corner. And, so I lived about 8 blocks from downtown, and I said, all right, well, it's a beautiful fall day. We're going to walk down to downtown. We're going to have some hot cocoa, and we're going to walk home, and everyone was like, you're insane. Like they're not walking. They are not walking. Like, and I said, but they can limp. Like and if not, my best friend's with me, and like one of us can stay and one of us will run back and get the car. It'll be fine. Well, that weekend we walked all the way to downtown. We sat on Santa's lap. We had hot cocoa. We walked all the way back to my house, and it was like a miracle. And I realized then that people were putting limitations on these children that they had no idea, because they had never seen a case like this. And so I said, absolutely, I'll take these children. And so I did. And so I basically decided, okay, so these are infant children. We're going to treat them like infants, and we're going to just push them. And we're just going to go through everything. They want to crawl around, they can crawl around. They want to learn how to walk, they're going to learn how to walk. We're going to do it all. We're going to learn our ABCs. We're going to sing, row, row, row your boat. We're going to do all of that. And we did. And, meanwhile, we found out that the reason that they were this way was their birth mom had Munchausen's by proxy. So she had been making them be sick. So they didn't have any of these diagnoses that they had. And so I used that information to really go, okay, I looked at my daughter, you're not sick. You're not sick. You don't have any of these diseases. Let's figure it out, And so I would tell the teachers, just push her till she cracks, is what I used to say. And so they would give her reading material, and they would give her reading material, and they would give her reading material, and she would just keep reading. She would just keep learning and keep learning and keep learning. To now, my daughter, who is now 20 years old, is in college for people who have a low IQ, but she has overcome all of that. My son, who is 17, turning 18 next in a couple weeks, is on the track team. This boy that we were told would never walk ever is in track. Which is amazing. It's an amazing miracle. But while we were together, my husband and I, we were 6 months away from adoption. I had these kids. We went through all the termination of rights. They were awarded to us. We were in the middle of the adoption process. And one night, my very not nice husband, remember, very not nice, he came home one night and said, I don't want to be married to you anymore. I think you should find someone younger. I don't want to be with you. We were fighting every day. And I was like, but excuse me, like we are in the middle of an adoption. And he said, don't care. Let's give them back. Let's give them back to the state. We don't need them. Like, you don't need them. I don't need them. I'm done. I don't want to be their dad. I don't want any of it. And that was an argument. And the very next day I said, listen, you don't want to be with me? Fine. That's fine. I want these children. These are my children. They're mine. You don't have to have them, but you have to stay with me until this adoption is final. And so for another 6 months, we pretended to be married. I endured a lot of abuse that I hid from a lot of people, and a lot of name calling, and a lot of fights, and a lot of arguments, and a lot of praying that my husband would die in his sleep. And I just posted about this today on Facebook. I'm not proud of it, but I didn't know, either God take him or take me. Take one or the other, because this is bad. This is very, very bad, and no one should live like this. All the while, people at my church were saying things like, you should just stay with him. You should just be with him. And I did. So our adoption was final, and he moved out not long after. And then I was there with 5 kids. And if I was broken before with one marriage and a couple of kids, now I'm way beyond broken. And so that was where I found myself. That was the bottom. That was like the bottom of the bottom of the pit of the bottom. My house was falling apart. I had 5 children. I had no real experience. And so I started learning. I went through a personal growth workshop, which is where I found my purpose, my passion. I started loving myself. I started realizing that I was a valuable human being and that everyone else was valuable too. And so I really started creating change in my life. And 2 years after my divorce, I met my husband that I have now. He had 2 daughters. I had 5 kids, and we got together, and he decided that we should have one more. That was his choice, not mine, because I was like, "What? Do you know we have 7 children? Just curious if you understand we have 7, like 7." And he was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Let's have one more." So I always say he had 2, I had 5 together. We had 1. We make a perfect 10. So we are. I'm a mom of 8 kids now. And I've had a lot of things since, I always say like my life just didn't turn into all cotton candy and rainbows after like I found myself and found love. There was still struggle. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 6 years ago. The doctor told me I would not be walking by the time I was 40. I'm 41. I am walking just fine. 2 years ago, my brother was murdered. Which is like one of the hardest things you ever hear. Is I was sitting on, excuse me, my front steps, and I had just put my parents on a bus to Wyoming. They were going to go on a quilting bus tour. And I got a phone call that I needed to go home because a detective, my brother had died. I needed to go home. My husband called me, "Your brother is dead, and you need to go home and meet a detective." And I was sitting on my front porch, and a detective pulled up with pants that were covered in mud up to his kneecaps. And he walked up and looked down and said, "I'm very sorry to tell you that your brother's been shot in the head twice." I'm sorry. And, and my parents are on a bus on their way to Montana. And so I was by myself. My other siblings don't live near me. And so I had to get my parents home from Montana. I had to help with funeral arrangements. And the thing that was the worst was my brother and I were currently in a sibling argument. Those stupid arguments that you don't even know why why you're even fighting. Even now to this day, I'm like, what were we fighting about exactly? I don't remember. So the last time I had seen my brother in the July before, 4 months earlier, I didn't even talk to him. Didn't say one word to him. I looked at him. I kind of did a whatever. And, and he went on his way because he's 37 and I'm 39. And like, we've got plenty of years left. We have a life history that most of our family members are still alive at 90. We got plenty of years left, and he was killed. He was murdered. And that was hard. And I spent months and months grieving, and I couldn't figure out why. And it wasn't until I realized that I was so angry, not with his killer, who I've forgiven, but myself, because I had been preaching for 8 years, don't leave anything left unsaid. Don't ever forget to tell your family you love them. Don't hold burdens and don't hold grief against them. And here I was, my brother's dead. I can never tell him I love him. I can never tell him I'm sorry. I can never do any of that. And I'm like the worst sister in the world. And so it took me 5 months. And then I realized that I needed to forgive myself. And how many times do we carry around shame in our life that we need to forgive ourselves for, that we need to unpack? It's about us. And forgiveness is not about anybody else. I have forgiven my brother's killer. We have not had trial yet. She is literally sitting one town over with her husband, boyfriend, whatever he is these days, and her 3 kids and her family. And they got to have Christmas together, and they got to have Thanksgiving together. And my family did not. We, we're missing my brother. And I have had to make the conscious choice every day that forgiveness is not for her. Forgiveness is for me. Because as long as I hold hatred towards this woman that killed my brother, I'm in a prison cell. They talk about that as long as you have to stand guard over that person that you hold a grudge against, you're actually the one that's the prisoner. As soon as you decide that they can have forgiveness, you don't have to tell them. Like, you can just let it go. You can just say, I forgive that person. So for me, it's, I just forgive that person. I'm no longer standing over lock and key like she's my victim. She's free to go. She's free to do her thing. And for those that are listening, that doesn't mean she's without consequence. I still believe she should serve life in prison. I still believe that the jury should come back and say she's guilty. She shot him in the back of the head twice. So I think that constitutes a guilty verdict. But I no longer have to be in burden. I no longer have to carry that around. So that's really, that's really something that I talk about is forgiveness. Forgiveness of yourself, forgiveness of others. Because as long as you are not in a place of forgiveness, you will be angry, and you'll never have hope, because you will just be a space of anger. Yeah.
That is so true.
That's kind of my story. There's a lot there. I mean, right? So a lot.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. Definitely go on to the Rope of Hope podcast page and put a link where people can find your book if they want to purchase that.
Yes.
I do have one final question for you before we close.
Yes.
I'm asking this of every guest. In your lifetime, what is the most inspiring thing that has been said to you?
What is the most inspiring thing? Ooh, you've caught me off guard.
See, that's the purpose of it.
Okay. So this is it. This is what I live by. So this is what I'm going to say. So it came from Jim Stovall, who is a decamillionaire. You can look him up. His name is James Stovall. I met with him, and he wrote several books. And he said to me once, now this is a blind man who is a decamillionaire because he's created a lot of things. And he said to me once, Angela, if you find yourself saying someone ought to do something about that, you should take a look in the mirror because you are someone. And that has been my life, my life's purpose for about 8 years since he told me that anytime I find myself saying someone ought to do something about that, I go ahead and I try to figure out how I can help the situation. So that's
absolutely love that.
Yeah, that's
your permission. I am going to make a little slide of that and put that on the page.
Yes, absolutely. Because it really is like, how many times are you like, well, we need this, we need this, we need this, we need this. Who's going to do something about that? Well, take a look and see if you can do something first. And
I love that.
Yeah, that's really the thing.
Well, again, thank you for coming on my show today. I've so enjoyed speaking to you, and I just thank you for bearing your soul and unpacking all of that
Thank
in
you.
a very condensed, short time. You guys, the marathon will be continuing here in about 20 minutes or so. I am going to have Sierra on the show, and we are going to be discussing some more life events and that type of thing. But if you are touched by any of these stories, if you are inspired, encouraged, and you want to help keep me caffeinated and keep this podcast going, this is how you support me. You buy a coffee, other way, buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/this fat girl life. Thank you again, and I will see you guys here shortly.
Bye.